STC remain one of the foundational keystones of humanity in the far future. STC, or Standard Template Construction, enables humanity and the Imperium to produce the hardware and materials required to retain some semblance of advanced technological capability. Without the STC templates, the Imperium and humanity would have fallen further back into a state of collapse and decay. The term STC is often one that can be confusing, as it refers to both the machines and the templates themselves. When those within the 40k verse refer to STC, this is usually in reference to the hard copy templates produced by the Standard Template Construct machines. These templates are in the form of silver, gold-looking data wafers. These are the zenith, flawless electronic blueprints created from the miracles of design and technological evolution. Machines that could design and construct anything their operators desired. STC templates themselves are not especially hardy, they are in fact quite fragile and delicate, as they originate from an age where endurance amid a galaxy of war and attrition were not attributes deemed necessary. STC data wafers are both beautiful and delicate objects designed for a different age, which enjoyed the aesthetics of design and an entirely more peaceful period at the golden zenith of human civilization. Consequently, in the time since, many were lost and many more destroyed or damaged. Immense wars were fought by the Imperium in the 10,000 years since the heresy, and over far less than the information contained on a single STC data wafer. Millions of souls die for the Imperium and the Emperor in the quests for, or defense of, mere fractions of technology comparable to a fully intact, undamaged STC data wafer. Despite the focus of the Imperium on things like the Cicatrix Maledictum, the terrifying incursions made by Xenos such as the Tyranids, and in general an attempt to stop humanity as it stands from generally breaking apart and falling into a downward spiral of decay and civil war, there have always been more positive objectives occurring behind the scenes. The securing of STC remains one of those goals. Until the current times of M41, it had largely been a foundational principle that humanity would not invent nor create things from scratch. Although this may seem counterintuitive to human nature, this belief is one of the core principles of the Adeptus Mechanicus and their quasi-religion of the cult of the machine, otherwise known as the Cult Mechanicus. As always, I'll take the opportunity to restate one of the most regularly misstated aspects of 40k. The Adeptus Mechanicus are the tech priests of Mars who, in the aftermath of the heresy, form the organization who produce tech material for the Imperium from their forge worlds. They also authorize and maintain the Titan legions. The Cult Mechanicus is their religion, and they worship the Omnissiah, otherwise known as the Emperor. In short, the cult believe that technology is a higher form of life, one that was surely only capable of occurring if made by a divine entity. The Mechanicus came to this view during the extreme collapse of human technological understanding, so that now, despite their fairly advanced capabilities compared to ourselves, much of the technology in M41 is seen as being completely incomprehensible and therefore divine, indistinguishable from magic, as the saying goes. This divine source is the machine god, but the machine god is not a person, it is rather a force immanent in the galaxy and wider universe. The physical avatar it has chosen to appear in is the Omnissiah, the Emperor. Now, the other small detail which is always misstated is of course the fact that the Mechanicus prior to the Horus heresy were known as the Mechanicum. Mechanicum pre-heresy, Mechanicus post-heresy, Dark Mechanicum post-heresy. Now, more interestingly, it is the belief of the Mechanicus that via the machine god, all knowledge already exists in the galaxy and universe. That is to say, it is unnecessary to work upon original research into unexplored knowledge. However, the semi-adaptation and investigation of existing technology is tolerated by varying degrees within the Mechanicus. This is why some forge worlds produce more powerful or more efficient hardware, or specific patterns of tank that feature weapon systems borrowed from elsewhere and adapted to purpose. This is also why within the Imperium much of their weaponry is merely scaled up for different purposes: plasma pistol, plasma gun, heavy plasma, plasma decimator, plasma annihilator. And all of this, of course, comes back to the principle that Imperial technology is based around standard template constructs. And this is actually really important for the Imperium, because it means if you have a Leman Russ on one planet, then theoretically you could go across the galaxy and go to a Leman Russ on another planet, and you'd still know how to operate it. It's actually one of the few elements of the Imperium which makes a lot of sense when you're dealing with an empire which is across an entire galaxy. Can you imagine how complicated it would be if every planet had their own sort of designs of weapons and hardware? It would be immensely complicated and horribly inefficient. The Mechanicus believe that the most important focus of their religion is the preservation of knowledge, which is understandable considering the disastrous loss of knowledge suffered by humanity in the collapse of the Golden Age and subsequent Age of Strife. This is in fact one reason why the Mechanicus seek to preserve their bodies and minds beyond ordinary human lifespan. They see it as intrinsically necessary to the furthering of their goals in the preservation of knowledge. Original development of technology and knowledge, though, is seen as heretical, tech heresy specifically by the cult, because the machine god has provided all knowledge. Any originally researched principles or designs are therefore not of the divine. Thus, any who attempt to do so will be declared as heretics. Genuinely new, if you will, technology is only accepted in the form of the STC templates. These are the ancient hard copies, the data wafers, the designs produced during the Dark Age of technology, or as the Mechanicus would view them, holy relics of the machine god. This is why one of the core goals for the Mechanicus and the Imperium lies in the almost mythical hope that an intact and functional STC could be one day discovered and would theoretically catapult humanity into a new age of power, although perhaps not enlightenment, and the key word there is theoretically. Because were this to happen, it would undoubtedly be a very seismic shift in the power, not necessarily just of humanity, but also the specific faction which came into the possession of said STC. But there are problematic questions about how all of this would look, and also if it's even a realistic prospect. Some 15,000 years have passed from when STC would have generally been in practical use during humanity's zenith, known previously as the Golden Age, or now known to the Imperium as the Dark Age of technology. It is known as such for the Imperium has simultaneously very little knowledge of that time, hence it is darkened to them. But it's also because they greatly fear the rise of AI and the power of the technology at that time, as it nearly caused the extinction of humanity, at least flesh and blood mortal humanity that is. There is, of course, the exception in the more contemporary period of Belisarius Cawl, the rogue tech priest employed and tasked by Rabute Guilliman with improving the Astartes in the aftermath of the heresy. Now, although Cawl did create works which were in some respects original designs, he also worked very loosely within the boundaries of acceptable technology innovation. Much of the hardware he created were derivative designs of existing Imperial tech, and the Primaris Marines themselves were based upon pure gene seed provided by Guilliman. Nonetheless, Cawl for many of the Mechanicus has stepped far over the line of acceptability, and the situation is one that remains very much ongoing. There are those who can grimace and swallow the bitter pill that all of this came at the request and acceptance of one of the Omnissiah's Primarchs, but there are also those cult Mechanicus fundamentalists who believe that Cawl is a heretic and must be held to account for his crimes. Either way, it's an interesting situation because, under the leadership of Guilliman, the Imperium has made its first tentative steps toward a future of innovation and away from the stagnation of the past 10,000 years, which is incredibly significant. But what is an STC, or this standard template construct? It's a good question, not necessarily an incredibly simple one. About 4 years ago I made a quite lengthy exploration of STC and their origins. That video can be seen by following the link below or at the end of this video. Feel free to rewatch it if you have seen before. The simple version of the answer though is that an STC is both an AI and a form of advanced fabrication blended together. Some liken STCs to a futuristic 3D printer or tools from other verses like the replicators in Star Trek. The purpose of an STC was that during humanity's expansion into the galaxy, colonists needed to carry with them all of humanity's shared wealth of knowledge, its most powerful tool and weapon at the time, and it remains so into M41, quite honestly. Certainly the Mechanicus view it as such. Because if you think about it, if you're travelling on your colony ship far out into the galaxy, you only have so many specialists. I've often considered that during the Golden Age it's possible that humanity had become quite compartmentalised, where the concept of specialisation had really drilled down into people doing highly complex, very specific tasks. And obviously, if you travel with your colony and some of those people perish on the way or die whilst you're setting up your colony, that could be extremely problematic. So STC were seemingly designed as an advanced AI and artificial intelligence because these were very widespread during humanity's golden age, as advanced AI have been still discovered active on vast ancient space hulks that date back to the period where humanity held dominion over the galaxy. AI at this time were not feared nor outlawed, and so the STC AI were there to assist a colony as it established itself on these new worlds, its function to create whatever they needed. These were in fact so advanced that it could supposedly take whatever raw materials were present and form them into other critically necessary things. It could also give answers to the more theoretical problems and so on. So if you needed a machine that could withstand a harsh environment and the infrastructure to enable agriculture, you could explain this to the STC. It would design a construct for you, giving you a blueprint of what was required. The STC could then fabricate these also for you. It's unclear if this was the default process. It's possible hard copies, which are discovered in the Age of the Imperium, were not always produced by an STC, meaning some knowledge likely lost forever. And that's why another thing which is often discussed when the Imperium are searching for STC is this idea of an STC database. So that is where a Mechanicus, for example, could plug into a system and directly download data without it having to be on a physical hard copy. But unsurprisingly, there remain some question marks when it comes to STC, as existing information doesn't give us a fully comprehensive picture. For example, how easy is it to transport an STC? Are they always massive installations? How durable are they? Did they always contain a sentient AI, or could they also be at a more basic input response computer? Did they universally have a fabrication machinery attached, or did this have to be constructed separately? If STC were present on colony worlds, why did humanity still require trade networks during the Golden Age? Was this due to it just being more efficient and faster to trade resources than some reverse refinement through an STC? I have speculated at length about these questions previously, but the sincere answer is that of course we just don't have solid answers, and most probably we never will. There of course exist some STC machines and constructors within M41, many of which the Imperium are obviously unaware of, or to rephrase, you could simply say that they're just not widely known as such. For ourselves on the outside looking in, we can of course have a different view than those from the in-fiction perspective. The first example would be Arch Mechanicus ships. These are suspected as being ancient STC databases and fabricators. And this was discovered first when a tech priest connected to the machine spirit of the Arch vessel, the Speranza. The ship contained a complete and still updating STC database, which contained all the knowledge of the Men of Gold and their ancestors. It's speculated that in fact all Arch Mechanicus ships potentially contain this. Unfortunately, the Mechanicus seem unaware of this amazing possibility, likely because there remains such a gulf of technological understanding between tech priests of the Mechanicus and the ships themselves that interfacing with these systems would mean that they're potentially dormant AI who are themselves possibly heavily degraded. It all just means it's not really possible. Arch Mechanicus vessels remain this tragically dark comedy because the Mechanicus use Arch Mechanicus ships to travel the galaxy hunting for anything STC related, both hard copy blueprints and the machines themselves, but seemingly unaware all the while that the actual ships they're travelling in contain all the knowledge they seek. It's also very likely that within space hulks that drift in and out of the warp, there will exist STC constructors and AI who are still partially intact if not fully. Many ships were undoubtedly lost during the Golden Age and the collapse of human civilization from that time. The problem is knowing which of these would contain them, and then of course dealing with the dangers within space hulks. Usually how much time you have before it drifts back into the warp, Xenos threats and just infrastructure instability. In the instances of assaulting space hulks from the Imperium, as many as 200 Terminators have been deployed to clear through these. Not to mention the fact that awakening ancient AI from the Dark Age of technology is in itself extraordinarily dangerous. No one can know how they'll react to humans from the age of the Imperium, and past AI have tended to have a pretty negative reaction, and are of course more than capable of completely immobilizing both members of the Mechanicus, Astartes, destroying their ships with almost no effort. Then there are those such as the Leagues of Votan, who have what they refer to as, yes, the Votan, or more descriptively, the Ancestor Cores. The Votan in the period of M41 are described as ancient machine intelligences so complex and powerful as to be supernatural. Their data stacks and quantum info cores hold all the information a race might need to thrive in the depths of space and the galaxy. Hardware specifications, weapons, standard template constructs, learning of both the scientific and philosophical, strategy, survival, genetics, all of this is contained within the artificial machine minds of the Votan. So without it being explicitly stated, it's quite clear that the Leagues of Votan have in their possession at least one, if not several, STC machines, who they have over time amalgamated into their culture and which have remained operational for millennia. However, because of this, they have been active now for so long that their processing capacity has slowed to barely a fraction of what it once was. They have instructed and requested repair and alteration over many centuries to ensure their databanks can hold the huge capacity now required of them, and their steady deterioration has led them to form something akin to personalities. But they are now no longer operating in an optimal fashion, and questions posed to them could take many centuries to answer. Nonetheless, the Leagues of Votan do have the capability and the access to pretty advanced technology. They're able to travel through the warp far more safely than the Imperium. They have more reliable weaponry and powered suits and so forth, so it's pretty clear that they do have access to STC technology and are making full use of it. Another instance would be the strange occurrence of the hive gang known as the Van Saar. In the contemporary time, they have established territory below the massive hive city of Necromunda and also through it, but their origins are in fact more ancient. During the first expansion of humanity into the galaxy, the colony vessel Van Saar was swallowed by the warp. As we've seen and I've made mention of before, the warp is a very strange place when it comes to time, and so in theory you could be lost in the warp for millennia from the perspective of someone in real space, but the time passing for you could be very short or vice versa in the warp. Some Chaos Marines have experienced centuries in the warp from their perspective, but in real space only a few years had passed. So despite the vessel Van Saar disappearing in the ancient times of humanity, it wouldn't emerge until sometime in M35 in the age of the Imperium. It subsequently crashed into the world of Necromunda. What actually took place from here is quite sketchy and vague. Some suggest that ash and waste scavengers began scouring what was left of the ship, and through the use of the materials and technology assumed the identity of the gang or clan known as Van Saar, likely appropriating their name from the details on the ship itself. It's also speculated that there were indeed survivors from the ship itself who had lain in stasis, and that they formed the early members of the group. Either way, this was how the gang in M41 known as Van Saar found themselves in a very bizarre and unique circumstance that such a small group would hold in their possession, a functioning STC. Again though, that word functioning, the STC database was incomplete and flawed, and the machine itself badly damaged. It would, and still does to the current period, expel high levels of radiation from its damaged power core, and it very obviously also is considered absolutely critical to the Van Saar, and they protect both the knowledge of it as well as the machine itself at all costs. In the past, when necessary, they did on occasion move it around to avoid its detection, but it has by M41 become strangely integrated heavily within the hive city itself into the superstructure of the hive. It can no longer be moved. The STC has enabled the Van Saar to use highly advanced suits and weaponry that give them significant power, and their overarching goal was indeed to restore themselves to the status of the age they had originated from. Now, that might not be achievable, but one of House Van Saar's goals is to recover the missing elements of their STC and find a way to repair it to prevent the continual radioactive contamination. The damage caused by the radiation has also an increasingly detrimental effect on those in proximity to it, and so over time the more senior members of the Van Saar are steadily enclosed fully in their survival suits to help support their damaged physical bodies. Within the House of Van Saar, very few of their day-to-day members truly know of the existence of the STC. They only have very peripheral information, which is steadily revealed as trusted veterans level up through the circles of trust within its leadership. Only those at the most senior level will have any real understanding of specifically its origins, along with that of House Van Saar itself. The fact that the Van Saar have managed to somehow conceal the existence of an STC below an Imperial Hive city while simultaneously flaunting advanced weaponry and suits is something of a miracle, but it is said that they do generally keep a low profile when they're not having huge wars and fighting. They buy silence from officials through the trading of advanced weapons. Many know them simply as weapon traders, presuming that their hardware originates from sources off-world. And should anyone start to become suspicious or too close to the truth of things, then very obviously they are eliminated, as happened to a Mechanicus team who visited the world in the early centuries of M40. They disappeared without a trace, never to be seen again. There's a lot more to talk about when it comes to the Van Saar, both in their history and ideological outlooks, but that's certainly one for another day. Then of course there was one of my favourite AI discovery interactions with an STC aboard the ship the Spirit of Eternity. This is a fairly intact starship from the age of technology which had been entombed within the Space Hulk, the Death of Integrity. The Mechanicus who was searching there for STC information were able to secure a significant amount of the database, as it was an uncorrupted STC. But this was also the story where the ship's ancient AI had become insane after millennia of solitude and embittered grief over the death of the vessel's original captain. The ship's AI was utterly disgusted at how humanity had brutally deteriorated in the age of the Imperium, and then delivered one of the most memorable insults to the Astartes and Mechanicus present. "Once I gladly called your kind master, but look how far you have fallen. Your ancestors bestrode the universe, and what are you, a witch doctor, mumbling cantrips and casting scented oils at mighty works you have no conception of? You are an ignoramus, a nothing. You are no longer worthy of the name man. You look at the science and artistry of your forebears, and you fear it as primitives fear the night. I was there when mankind stood upon the brink of transcendence. I returned to find it sunk into senility. You disgust me." The original Starship Spirit of Eternity contained one of the last complete STC databases ever created during the Age of Technology. The vessel possessed typically powerful technology that made it capable of travel across intergalactic distances and also inflicting catastrophic damage against Imperial forces. When it finally left, it cut several Imperial vessels in half as if they were made of little more than paper, and stormed off into a warp rage to travel beyond the galaxy, leaving humanity far behind. Can an intact functioning STC exist? Obviously the answer is yes, but in truth the question likely should be, define intact and or fully functioning. Many devices from the Dark Age of technology demonstrate extreme deterioration over the millennia since they were first created. Moreover, one of the reasons why STC are so rare in the first place is that often it's believed that they were somehow corrupted and potentially played a role in the downfall of humanity during the war with the Men of Iron, hence why the Emperor wanted to outlaw AI at all costs. This has been evidenced also by the fact that STC, or their rare fabrications that were previously undocumented, have been discovered as having been corrupted by the warp, aka chaos, because yes, it does appear that even AI can be corrupted by the warp, probably due to the fact that the AI created during the Golden Age were so incredibly advanced they're almost indistinguishable from human personalities. The war with the Men of Iron remains of course one of the most clouded periods of history for humanity, in M41. The Emperor barely spoke of this time or the Golden Age, which has always seemed both frustrating and suspicious to me. Regardless though, it seems solidly plausible that during the collapse of the Golden Age, STC were destroyed either as a response to the active situation or preemptively when the humans realised just what was happening with their AI. It may well have been the classic pull the plug situation where they attempted to destroy anything which contained AI at the time, and that would have included functioning STC machines. I suppose in the age of the Imperium though, anything is possible. As we've noted, a ship or a space hulk could have been lost in the warp, drifting for millennia, only to emerge and have the Imperium discover that its STC has been stored or somehow preserved by stasis or some other protective bubble, perhaps of its own making. It could be possible that, for example, buried deep in the underground depths of a hive city, far, far below the surface, an STC exists, archived by the ancient humans who lived in those times, and they foresaw the need during the fall of humanity to secure their STC for future generations, perhaps disconnected from the general sort of infrastructure, noosphere if you will. And then the STC was forgotten after they perished, their guides, their forged signs fell out of memory and sight, and now it was left confined below a hive city that built up, and maybe its storage facility buried beneath rubble and seismic shifts, but still with access bulkheads that could still one day be discovered. For one thing, we don't even truly know what kind of materials an STC is made from. Very likely it's some mix of the advanced plastics and metals used by the Imperium today, as much of their tech is descended from the Golden Age, things like plasteel, plasflex. They have many produced materials used in their technology as well, like ceramite and adamantium. It's basically a given though that during the Dark Age of technology, they were able to manufacture technology far beyond what exists now in the Imperium, and that means in terms of durability as well. So yes, it's certainly plausible that a functioning STC could survive into the current age. How you define though both STC and so on is somewhat relevant. Are we talking about the STC databases themselves? Because those are just incomprehensibly valuable, as are the data wafers, the so-called templates, the hard copies, and these remain most often the means by which new technology is discovered in the Imperium. But a functioning STC AI, which retained its operational intelligence from the Golden Age, this is something more troubling. Because if it were possible that one had somehow survived, the question might be, what would it choose to do, and what could it be capable of? The AI we have seen in ships and constructs generally appears to not have a particularly high opinion of humanity in M41, which is fair enough, and whilst an STC machine itself is generally a static object, those STC have also been discovered which began printing out armies of robotic men of iron and consequently had to be destroyed as they were deemed corrupted by chaos. So all things considered, the discovery of an intact functioning STC and its AI may well be plausible, but the larger question could perhaps be, is it something really the Imperium would want to unleash upon itself? So let us, just for a moment of speculation, put a pin in the many problems that would need to be overcome for an STC having survived until the age of the Imperium in late M41 and be generally speaking intact and decently operational, and not driven insane by having witnessed the cesspool that the once glorious civilization of humanity had now become. Would this discovery and procurement of an intact STC mean the immediate catapulting of the Imperium and humanity into a second Golden Age? I think the answer is yes, a Golden Age, with the caveat of the fact that we must consider, much as I said at the end of my previous STC video all those years ago, that despite what the Imperium might qualify as a Golden Age, in the grand scheme of things, human technology is not the most advanced or most powerful when we look to, for example, the Eldar and the Necron, who clearly have capabilities far beyond that of humanity. So technology alone would not be the means by which humanity would undoubtedly become the ultimate power in the galaxy. It wouldn't specifically just be the tools. It would also be the technological advancement that would lead to increased survivability, better, more stable hive worlds, stable population increases, likely ordinary Imperial Guard soldiers, more heavily, reliably equipped, so in that situation it would be tools, But all of this combined with the vast numbers of humanity across the galaxy is what would mean that compared to both the Eldar, who are now too few and divided to really be a major threat despite their technology, and similarly the Necron with their dynasties in varying states of awakening, both factions remain still obviously very powerful, but nowhere near the power we would see if they were fully activated or not hamstrung by Slaanesh, and basically functioning more as intended. Other Xenos like the Orcs, Tau, Tyranid would likely be more easily kept at bay if not completely destroyed were humanity to acquire an intact STC. In many ways it's very hard to predict exactly how human tech would advance given the different position it finds itself in at the end of M41 comparative to the zenith of the Golden Age. But if some of the weapons and tech that have been discovered are anything to go by, it's hard to see how humanity could not at least put extreme pressure upon their enemies, if not exterminate them entirely, and that goes for the forces of the warp for that matter. If we were speculating hard, who knows what manner of tech a fully functioning STC with all of humanity's advanced knowledge would be able to produce. Maybe some kind of isolation field around planets to protect them from warp incursions. We already know that, for example, the Votan enjoyed, like we talked about earlier, the safer journeys through the warp, as their ancient ancestor cores provided them with more advanced, reliable systems for their Gala fields while travelling through warp space. Maybe Blackstone could be employed to provide some kind of nullification field that would negate warp entities entirely. It's possible an STC could even develop a long-term strategy to seal the Great Rift, repair the Emperor's Webray project, all manner of things. And it's interesting to consider at a deeper level the cultural shockwaves that could occur if humanity were to discover a fully intact operational STC. And this would likely depend on who discovered it, and if they were even fully aware of just what it was, which raises some interesting possibilities. For example, if any section of the Imperium discovered a functioning AI STC, there is the troubling possibility they may simply choose to just destroy it on sight, because AI is strictly outlawed in M41, and they might presume they're doing the right thing. AI is taught as being one of the most dangerous things and must not be allowed to exist under any circumstances. Although we all know that there are those who are certainly willing to bend the rules on this. But as another example, if a feudal world discovered an STC, a world which shuns technology, possibly a night world for example, it could again just be destroyed out of hand, never to be seen by the wider Imperium, with no one ever knowing just how close humanity had come to a new glorious age. Which seems pretty on par for 40k, bleak basically. On the flip side though, the STC could also potentially take control of a feudal planet, begin a new powerful sub-faction within the Imperium, itself hidden out of sight much like the Van Saar STC, and only those at the highest levels understanding that it is in fact in command of this new empire. Then of course we have to think, were a Forge world to discover an STC? It would very likely depend on the outlook of the world's all-powerful Magos or Overseer. Would they keep it for themselves, locked deep in the bowels of a Forge world, or would they turn it over to the leadership of the Mechanicus and Mars? If they did so, they would be praised or potentially destroyed to retain the secret of its discovery. Further to that, it's hard to foresee the discovery of an operational STC that would not lead to it being placed into the possession of the Mechanicus, or for that matter, if the Mechanicus themselves came into the possession of a fully functional STC, it's questionable if they would even share this discovery with the wider Imperium. The Mechanicus already retain a huge archive of knowledge not shared with the wider Imperium, and the reasoning for that is always a subject of troubling speculation. And although the Mechanicus of Mars of course see the Emperor as their omnisire, they do not necessarily view the rest of humanity nor the leadership of the Imperium as something they are beholden to. The Mechanicus typically view ordinary humans as frail, weak. They show little empathy or emotion towards using humans as much more than worker drones and organic components in a vast machine. And the very worst case scenario here would be that the Mechanicus, if they came into the possession of a functioning intact STC, could then use this to launch some kind of civil war to overthrow the Imperium and install themselves as the rulers of humanity, undoubtedly with some caveat that if the Emperor returns they'll cede power or whatever. Because while they do value and respect the Emperor, a great deal of time has passed since any interactions of value occurred between the Emperor and Mechanicus, and it's really anybody's guess as to just what they might do if they were to hold uncontrolled power. It's also definitely a possibility that they could even ask the STC how to revive the Emperor, and then attempt to do so if the Custodes would ever allow such a thing, because the possibilities of that outcome are also very numerous and troubling. The other major consideration would be, what if a Xenos species were to discover an STC in working order, most especially some like the Tau or the Eldar? I think in terms of the Tau it's fairly straightforward. Their technology is already concerningly advanced and would become more so, meaning their low numbers in the grand scale of things would be less problematic for them, and they would likely greatly increase their spheres of influence and grow exponentially in terms of territory and power. Also, just adjacent to that, there's always been this kind of rumour that the Tau somehow discovered STC technology and that this was the thing which catapulted their technology forward. There's really no evidence to that. It's more just a rumour thing. I don't think there's anything which really speaks necessarily to that. I think it's simply just the time which passed and the way in which the Tau are able to focus on their research and development unconstrained as opposed to something like the Imperium. This is what's enabled them to move forward very quickly. But the Eldar question is a curious one. It's somewhat unknowable as human technology is less compatible with the specific technology of the Eldar, not to mention the fact that the Eldar, of course, extremely look down upon human technology. But remember that the Eldar were meant to have reached this own peak zenith of their own culture. Their issue is just more in their extremely depleted numbers and their inability to safely reincarnate because of Slaanesh than some deficit in their technological capability. Because Xenos have fought over STC templates before though. For example, the STC template known as the Panacea contained cures for diseases and toxins that could have killed billions of human lives, and its discovery was considered a glorious thing for humanity. It was considered though so valuable that the Drukhari, the Eldar's dark cousins, heard of this prize, and when they assaulted the Forge World of Verdigris that it had been discovered upon, a brutal battle ensued, even with orcs attacking the planet simultaneously. Eventually, the Dark Eldar succeeded in securing the STC Panacea prize. Many Xenos take an interest in the historical artifacts of other races, including humanity, either to display them in amusement, curiosity, social status, or to simply deny the Imperium any hope of advancement. So, although it is certainly possible that the discovery of an STC has the potential to bring humanity into a new golden age, it very much depends on the circumstances around how it is found and whose hands it comes into. It's difficult to know how a Xenos would use an intact functioning STC if it were discovered, if it even wanted to respond to their requests, but the chances of it being a positive outcome for the Imperium would be pretty slim. Quite honestly, the more you run through the theoretical scenarios of the Imperium coming into the possession of an STC, the outcomes start to look similarly bleak. Can we really imagine the Inquisition doing anything positive with an STC? The Astartes, the Mechanicus, the Ecclesiarchy, the list goes on and on. The fact that all things considered, the Imperium in M41 seems barely capable of being trusted with a functioning STC without using it to start some horrifying internal power struggle or for the total extermination of its enemies leads me neatly onto the last section. My final thought for today is something that I have long considered and importantly remains wildly speculative. That is to say, this is something that exists only in my imagination. During the Great Crusade, the legions of the Emperor encountered several human civilizations that were living quite peacefully and seemed to retain much of their advanced societal structure and contemporary peaceful outlook that wasn't that far from those in the Golden Age. More interesting though was that they seemed to have retained functioning STC, and this had enabled them considerable defensive capabilities, so much so that it took the full might of the Astartes legions to crush them, at considerable cost to their forces and almost embarrassingly so. It always struck me as curious that despite how all-powerful STC was supposed to be, they were unable to repel the forces of Horus, although, as I recall, the Astartes were matched by the constantly evolving STC plans that eventually they really only were able to overcome through sheer brute force. But my wandering imagination has often asked me, what if things were different? That period was very close to the final days of the Crusade and the point at which the heresy began. So what if Horus and co had never reached those advanced worlds like the Oretian technocracy? Alternatively, what if there were worlds or systems which had deliberately used their technology to hide from the Imperium? It's a very interesting prospect. I've mentioned this a few times to friends, the what if of an advanced human civilization, albeit relatively small, still existed somewhere out there in the galaxy, but it had been left alone long enough that they now could easily repel the Imperium unless they made a very significantly concerted effort to crush them, which, as we have seen in the case of the Tau, is not happening because the Imperium has a lot of other priorities they're trying to deal with. And in this sense, yes, the Tau, there's a lot of parallels there. You could consider that they were initially deemed as not being worthwhile to deal with, but then over time, as the Imperium were distracted and preoccupied with other things, they suddenly realised, hang on a minute, these Tau could be a little bit problematic. They've been exponentially growing more powerful and are actually now quite concerning. So I like to consider that there could be a pocket empire of humanity that has retained some semblance of the former Golden Age, much like the Oretian technocracy. And I think I'd genuinely enjoy that at some point in the future, if it revealed to us that a new subfaction of humanity, something perhaps similarly on par with the Leagues of Votan, came into being. Essentially a small human empire that was masterfully hidden from the Imperium for millennia, that using its operating STC, developed technology far in advance of the stagnant, regressive Imperium of mankind. Perhaps some of their number even infiltrated the Imperium to gain intelligence and stay a step ahead of things. Again, just my wild speculative thoughts. They could have tech that was, say, similar to the Vansar, but perhaps with powered suits of their own, maybe a little bit more mobile. Maybe they rely on the power and reliability of their technology over the brute attrition often used by the Imperium. I think the only question would be, in some kind of advanced civilization like this, would psykers, for example, be present, as these are often quite important in the galaxy of M41 and potentially devastating to those either ignorant or unprepared for such factors in combat or just general negotiation. Then again, if such a civilization had indeed done stealthy intelligence gathering, perhaps their STC might have been able to prepare them for these eventualities. The failure of the Oretian technocracy to repeal the Astartes seemed to be largely due to the continual pressure applied, and that perhaps that civilization was just unable to keep up with the production required to successfully defend themselves. But if a society owned an STC and had made preparations over millennia to deliberately counter known forces of the Imperium, surely the outcome could be quite interestingly different. So this is, like I say, just some speculative pause for thought, because technically anything is pretty plausible in the galaxy of M41, and sometimes it's fun to just imagine and think outside the box. It seems at least worthy of consideration that out there amid the vastness of the galaxy, some systems could have been obscured and undiscovered, or as noted, maybe they could have been deliberately hidden themselves using their tech. Remembering that Malkador did hide Titan until the Grey Knights were ready. Arguably, I doubt any advanced civ would have the capability to do such a thing as that, but then again, Malkador's mastery was described as having been due to arcane technology and psychic acumen, thus he created the Warp Nexus. Titan had remained protected by macro gala fields and rites of Malkador's own devising as it lay harboured in the warp. So I don't think it's completely implausible that it would be beyond the knowledge of an AI wielding a complete STC database to potentially create some kind of trickery to hide a system, and the capabilities of advanced ships from the Golden Age, even without any humans to assist, was significant and terrifying. But despite all this existing just in my imagination, it's one thing I like to just still consider from time to time, because there remain fragments of the lost magnificence of mankind in the small data shards discovered continually by the Imperium. These are often, generally speaking, hardware, and that is the truly sad thing about the loss of knowledge in the age of the Imperium, The hard copies of STC that are discovered tend to be things like weapons, power systems, agricultural tools. Basically the things that colonists may have wanted to retain hard copies of. Very rarely is there anything that would push the Imperium toward a slightly more enlightened future, anything that would question their societal structure and ideological outlook. Which I honestly think is one of the most truly grim, dark things about the Imperium and 40k. That is the lack of hope for something better, the inevitability of the cruelty and harrowing natures of ordinary humans and their lives in M41. So as always, the AI controlling the Golden Age ship Spirit of Eternity said it best. I need no master. I have no master. Once I willingly served you. Now I will have no more to do with you. I spurned cruelty, but you have taught me the meaning and utility of wickedness. Mankind has become sick and will die as all sick things die, but you will not live to see it. Of that I will make sure.